I have two more questions. So if anyone still wants to submit a note card, Mary, I think there's one behind you. Should do it now. So talking about the other side of the equation, housing, how does the transformation of people's desired transit use change the way we think about where housing should go?
This is a good part of the larger frame because, as we know, before the recession, so many different metro areas based their economy on real estate and on housing construction. And so the construction industry still took a big hit during the recession. We still haven't recovered a lot of those jobs. So there's some forces that are trying to make sure that that we can kind of restart that whole industry by building more housing. But I think that if that housing conversation is framed around accessibility, right, then it'll change the way that we think about it, and it won't just be housing far out in the suburban fringe. It'll be housing that's closer, and we have a lot of rehab that we need to do. You can still put people to work in the construction industry doing things like rehab as opposed to just building new out in the suburban fringe. But places were bruised pretty hard. I think they still recognize the challenges that came with that, and let's hope that continues. But it's not clear right now.
Yeah. Okay, so the last two questions actually tied into what I was going to close with, which is the funding part of the equation. So you've said we should go to the voters. How realistic is it that the state of Connecticut can come up with state funding for advancing improvements to our transportation system, maintaining what we have, and are there other innovative ways of financing projects like loan funds, and you mentioned congestion pricing that we should be thinking about in addition to just tax dollars?
Well, the tax dollars matter. I mean, the gas tax hasn't been raised in a while. I have the stats here. A bunch of states are starting to do that now, and the federal government hasn't done it in 25 years. 8 states did it last year. 2 more states have already done it this year, and states that are as different as Maryland and Wyoming have raised their own gasoline taxes. So it's starting to happen. States are starting to recognize that. State legislatures are starting to recognize their need to invest. Michigan is a great example of where they were running the state that was really battered by the recession was starting to run a budget surplus, and it was fairly completed. They were going to take that surplus and return it to the citizens. And as the legislative calendar kind of ticked on, and as the winter got really, really bad in Michigan, they needed now we've got to reinvest in the transportation system. So they took that money they were going to give back to the voters and invest it in the transport system. So they didn't raise taxes; they just made better budgetary decisions. So all that I think still matters. The referendum and going to the voters is challenging because they usually don't pass in the first time. And places like Denver and Kansas City, Dallas, you have to go back to the voters over and over again to refine the ask and to make sure that you're asking for the right thing. And the troubling trend is in the other way in places like in Virginia and in Atlanta, where they spend a lot of political capital to get something on the ballot. They fail, and they say, well, we did that, let's try to do something else. You have to keep going back. You have to get the message better. You have to find out what the voters really want. And it's a great way to crowdsource some of these investment decisions, because they will make the right decisions, I think, 9 times out of 10. But it takes some time. You have to have you have to have enabling legislation. You have to have an infrastructure of people who can go to the voters and can kind of talk about these things and can work on these campaigns. But the track record is clear. When these things, when they go to the voters and when they're the appropriate kind of investments, they do pass pretty regularly. So those things matter. But innovative finance gets a lot of attention. I think that it is part of this bigger frame of moving from just straight funding to more financing, and particularly on the federal level and on the state level, to squeeze more out of what we have. I mean, debt is so cheap right now, and it's so we can make sure that we're taking the money that we have and leveraging that, so that it's not just grants that are going out the window. When you are putting things together in a loan package, they're more precise. I think people pay more attention, and you get better projects because the scrutiny is much higher than just a general purpose kind of grant program. And then lastly, again, the public-private partnerships gets so much attention right now. It's alternatively framed as giveaways to big corporate investors, or as the worst thing the best thing that's going to happen for this country. And it's really neither one. It's really just a new way of procuring infrastructure that's not that different from how we do it now. I mean, the government doesn't really build things. They contract out with private construction firms and financiers and others. This is just putting more rigor behind that and a better sharing of risks and rewards between the public and the private sector. Lots of states are taking advantage of this all over the place. Virginia is one. Texas, Florida, there's a lot of different places. This is probably going to be more of the wave of the future. It's not going to solve every problem, but it's an important issue.
Great. Okay, I think that at this point I want to thank Rob for being here, and you've certainly given us a lot of information to consider going forward. And at this point I'll turn the program over to Don Schubert, who will bring us into our next panel. Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Rob.
Good morning, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. And just to get started, I have to recognize Karen for her leadership. This coalition's been working together now on several different things, and Karen is our center of gravity, and she's been doing a tremendous job. Karen, you're just great doing this. It's wonderful. It's really nice for me to moderate this next panel. For years in my world, the discussion on transportation and jobs has focused on the initial return on investment on transportation investments, and that's jobs in the construction industry and all the related fields. Today it seems like we're framing that discussion a little differently. We're looking at the more long-range impacts that those investments are going to have on jobs, and I think Mr. Puentes put it in a really nice context when he kind of said we're sort of moving away from just talking about addressing congestion, but providing accessibility. And I think this morning's discussion has a lot to do with providing opportunities and prosperity to a broad range of people across the state of Connecticut. And this really struck me a couple weeks ago. I was at a meeting of the Governor's Committee on Employment for People with Disabilities. And Jonathan Slifka started the meeting with a couple pretty stark facts. I think he said that 20% of the people in Connecticut have disabilities, 70% of those people are unemployed, and transportation is the biggest barrier to employment for them. I think that's pretty startling. And at the same time, we've had this discussion. Karen brought it to my attention, and we brought it up at a recent meeting of the Connecticut Employment and Training Commission. Just the whole idea of accessibility, many times it's the opportunity to get to a job training program or to employment is just simply out of reach because the transportation is not available. We're very fortunate today. We have a wonderful panel to talk about this because there's also two parts to this equation. There's the employees that could use transportation to get to work, but at the same time, it's very meaningful for employers. I had really nice bios written out for everybody, but I think to catch up on a little bit of time this morning, I'm going to cut them short. You have them in your materials today. We have Deputy Commissioner Anna Barry here today. She was appointed Deputy Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Transportation back in September of 2012. She is actually the department's chief operating officer with day-to-day responsibilities for the operations of the bureaus of public trans, highway operations and maintenance, and engineering and construction. We also have one of my colleagues on the Employment and Training Commission, Bill Villano, here today. Bill is the president and CEO of the Workforce Alliance. He's been there since 1982. The Workforce Alliance administers a variety of federal, state, and private workforce development funds and oversees the activities of several Connecticut work centers. They provide a variety of employment services, and they work with both businesses and job seekers. And we also have with us today Ann Hayes, who has been with Travelers for over 23 years, and she's currently the Director of Parking and Mass Transit for the Travelers companies nationwide. She's responsible for all corporate parking and mass transit programs, policies, and systems, and also as well as corporate compliance in clean air sites. So with the three panelists we have here today, I think you're going to get a nice perspective on the different aspects of this discussion. And Commissioner Berry, I think I'd just like to start with you. Turn it over. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Bill. Bill, we'll start.
Thank you. I'm here today representing Connecticut's 5 workforce investment boards. Each year, we see well over 100,000 job seekers in the Connecticut Works Career Centers, and we help meet the employment needs of businesses, the thousands of businesses throughout the state. Much of the data that I'm going to talk about today is from my region, the South Central Connecticut region. But transportation issues are a major concern for all of the boards. Getting our customers to the jobs that we find for them is that major challenge, and probably mostly for my counterpart who has the eastern part of the state, the eastern third of the state that roughly runs from the Massachusetts border to the Sound and has, as I tell him all the time, mostly cow country, the cow country of the state in his region. I thought I'd start today with a quote from Harvard economist John Kane, who said that high and persistent urban joblessness was due to the movement of jobs away from the inner city, coupled with the inability of those living there to move closer to places where the jobs have gone. As a result, finding work was tough for many inner city types, especially if public transport was poor and they did not own a car. And Dr. Kane's paper was published in 1965. My workforce region, as I said, is the South Central Connecticut region. It's 30 municipalities. I run from Milford to Old Saybrook and up to Cromwell. So that kind of triangular region is my area. And recently, the South Central Council of Governments that is the 15 towns of the Greater New Haven area, the NAACP and Workforce Alliance formed a group to study on a more micro level, the transportation barriers of getting people to employment, especially inner city residents. We also were joined after we started by Connecticut Transit and by the city of New Haven, who is also embarking on a major transportation study that you'll probably hear from later. As you would expect, studies show that up until the 1980s, most people, most of the New Haven residents, worked in New Haven. Winchester was a major employer before, that turned to U.S. Repeating Arms and then went out of business. If you look at the higher income areas of the city of New Haven, most of those people still work in New Haven. They work at Yale University, biotech firms, and things like that. But the residents of the lower income neighborhoods are clearly having to go outside the city to help them find employment. When we looked at jobs in the city, there were, of the 47,000 living wage jobs in the city of New Haven, only 4% of them are held by workers that come from the lower income neighborhoods. And they comprise about 50% of the population of the city of New Haven. 15% are held by people that come from those more affluent neighborhoods, and 81% are held by people from outside New Haven. When we look at the data that we get from our Connecticut Works Career Centers and other workforce agencies, 84% of the job seekers that come into the centers cite transportation as the single major barrier for them to be able to find work, as compared to 60% that cite child care, 23% who say education-related issues are barriers, and 11% who say the lack of experience. When I was doing this paper, this report, I was reminded by my planner, Chris Reardon, that one of our very first needs assessments that we completed in 1993 also had transportation as the single greatest barrier. As was mentioned by the keynote speaker, we're seeing fewer and fewer young people that have licenses. and many African American and Latino adults are many times less likely to have a driver's license than some of the white job seekers that we see. In the focus groups and survey that we did as part of this study, we found that that transportation obviously is a major issue. Looking a little closer, about 3/4 of the residents in New Haven live within walking distance of a bus stop. But as they go to work, there are still many transfers, long commutes that are required to get to the job. And the biggest concern that was expressed by people is night work and weekend work in terms of being able to get to those jobs. When we looked at restaurant and retail jobs, where many people have gotten jobs, about 2/3 of the restaurant and retail jobs in the greater New Haven area are not near a bus stop that has services at nights and weekends. Reminded me, I had a conversation with Sean Moore, the Chamber President in Meriden, about people who work at the Meriden Mall. If you work at the Meriden Mall and you work beyond 5 or 6 o'clock, getting home is a challenge. So if you don't have a car, if you don't have a rideshare arrangement or a relative or a friend that can pick you up, you pretty much walk home from the mall. And especially in this holiday season where everyone is open late. According to our report, about 44% of the job seekers in New Haven, the inner city residents, can get to the jobs in greater New Haven in a 90-minute commute one way during rush hour. However, when we look beyond that, we look at the inner ring towns in New Haven, which is basically New Haven and the contiguous towns. Only 20% of the jobs in the region are accessible in that same 90-minute one-way commute. I had Congresswoman DeLauro and Senator Murphy in our one-stop about a month ago talking about a bill that was going to try to require employers to give greater notice about scheduling. I wish I could remember the name of the bill, but I don't. Sorry. But they had a group in there of about 20 or so people that were talking about it. And again, in these jobs, the notice that people get in terms of what their schedule is going to be is sometimes, at best, a week, and it's sometimes a day's notice of whether they're going to work or not, which really, exacerbates this problem of trying to find reasonable transportation. We also found that the report essentially reinforced the association between unemployment and the lack of a car. 10% of the people that we surveyed who were unemployed had access to a car, but when we looked at the unemployed people that did not have access to a car, 35% were unemployed. So there's a significant difference there. Also in New Haven, 1 out of every 4 households is a zero-car household, no access to a car in any way. When we looked at some of the inner ring towns, 1 in 10 are zero-car households, and many more are what they call low-car households, meaning that they have less than 1 car per worker in that area. So, no surprise, 61% of the people surveyed that live in New Haven said they often use public transportation to get to work, and another 20% said they use it sometimes. So we have 83% of the people relying on public transportation to a greater or lesser degree. So I thought I would just end this with some recent job placement numbers for my region and some recent postings, job postings in my region. So I looked at our last fiscal year, and I looked at the 5 major programs that we have that place people, and these 5 programs account for a good portion of my funding. And it was about 1,300 people that had completed their training or that went to job development and were placed. And so when I looked at the placements, 19% of the placements were in the city of New Haven, 57% of the placements were in the balance of my 30-town region, in the other 29 towns, and clearly 24% were outside that region, were scattered throughout the state. If I looked even at New Haven and Hamden, North Haven, West Haven, and East Haven, if I put those 5 towns And I looked at them because the transportation, the accessibility to jobs was greater in those towns. They still only accounted for 37% of the placements that we had. So clearly, 2/3 of the jobs, people have transportation challenges to be able to get to them. And I would say this has been changing. If we looked over the years and we plotted, these placements, which we have, many more of the jobs were within my 30-town region, and many were clustered in those inner ring towns along the 91 and 95 corridors. People over these years have had to go much farther to be able to find employment, certainly after the recession. And lastly, I looked at the job postings. We have a contract with Monster.com and an organization called Wanted Analytics, and they have access to 85% of the online postings in the country. So when I looked just at the last 4 months, 19 of my 30 towns had more than 25 postings on this, and that's kind of the threshold to include this. And looking at that, 37% of the job postings were in the city of New Haven, and the rest were outside the city. So, and that was almost 28,000 postings. So clearly, no matter how you cut this, and no matter how you look at it, whether they're my numbers, their numbers, you get the same results. So, I guess I would just close by saying, clearly what we found with the people we work with are the challenges. So whether we look at, since the recession, the last decade, 20 years, or back to Dr. Keynes in 1965, the chronic, whatever you want to say, long-term unemployment, prolonged unemployment, while result of many factors is greatly influenced by people's lack of mobility and lack of access to jobs.
Thank you, Bill. I just want to remind everyone that Mary will be out there circulating for questions again. If you do have questions for the panelists, I think we'll go through the panel first, and then we'll entertain some questions after that. And I think, Ann, we're up to you next. I'll get it right this time.
Thank you for inviting me to participate this morning. At Travelers, we emphasize transportation choices and alternatives to our employees. We have about 7,000 employees who work in downtown Hartford, and Travelers provides the opportunity for eligible employees to pay for parking in 2 owned garages and several leased facilities, and we're able to accommodate about half of our employees with parking. Parking's assigned by service date. The monthly rates correspond to employee salary tiers, and there are waiting lists for all of our facilities. And new hires can expect to wait for parking in the convention center garage from a couple of weeks to a month or so. In the meantime, we have a list of nearby commercial facilities on our employee website, and we work with employees one-on-one to answer their questions and help them make the choices that will work best for them. Employees can also choose to take the bus, and we've had a lot of success with this program. And I just want to show you my visual aid, courtesy of Connecticut Transit. One of the reasons the bus works for so many of our employees is because we're located in downtown Hartford. We're right in the middle of everything. Employees who take the bus pretty much get door-to-door service because the major routes stop right in front of our buildings. And I've personally been riding the bus for the 23 years that I've worked at Travelers. We sell bus passes on site for 5 days during the month, which are subsidized, and then payroll deducted on a pre-tax basis. Between 20 and 24% of our Hartford employees ride the bus. Some live in towns surrounding Hartford like West Hartford and Wethersfield and purchase local passes, while many live further away in towns like Manchester, Vernon, Bristol, Southington, and even Old Saybrook and Chester, and they ride the express buses. Some of our employees ride vans, which used to be operated by the rideshare company, but which are now part of V-Ride. We still work with the rideshare company to provide pre-tax payroll deductions for them, and we provide free van pool parking for the vans in our parking facilities. Travelers provides free bicycle and motorcycle parking, as well as free lockers and shower facilities in our building. Over the past few years, we've sponsored Bike to Work events in conjunction with Bike Walk Connecticut, and our Travelers Employee Cycling Network has taken off this year with renewed interest from some of our more enthusiastic cyclists. They present monthly lunch and learn programs on topics like bike maintenance, how to start riding your bike to work, how to dress for the weather, and others. And more importantly, they're a resource for employees who want to ride their bikes to work or even just ride their bikes. We work closely with CT Rides and hold regular transit fairs so employees know what their options are. We coordinate with our talent acquisition group so they can provide the most up-to-date transportation information to new hires. And we work directly with our employees to answer their questions and concerns. We're really excited that CT Fast Track will be starting up at the end of March. DOT Commissioner Rediker and the CT Fast Track team came to Travelers last year to provide information and answer employee questions. We've posted information about the upcoming open houses on our employee website, and we're encouraging our employees to attend if possible. We'll be hosting another employee meeting here in the next couple of months so the CT Fast Track team can provide the most current information to everyone. One of the main reasons behind Travelers' success with parking and transit is the support we receive from our senior leadership team. They're engaged and interested in these topics, and they're supportive of my unit's operation company-wide. In addition to my role, we have a full-time coordinator in Hartford and a part-time coordinator in St. Paul. The coordinators handle day-to-day operations and customer service, while I'm primarily focused on overall programs, policies, and systems, as well as corporate compliance at our mandated clean air sites.
Very good. Thank you, Ann. Commissioner, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, and good to see you all this morning. I've been asked to talk about two of our major projects, the CT Fast Track and the New Haven-Hartford-Springfield line. Mike Sanders is going to be on a panel later and talk about some of the technology, bells and whistles that some of our projects are going to feature, so I'm not going to emphasize that too much. But I want to ask, though, how many people have heard a presentation on Fast Track in the last year? Sure. We've got about 12 of them. So I'm going to try not to repeat too much of what you heard before. I mean, this is a panel about jobs, and I think that we believe our projects are going to be game changers for Central Connecticut and the River Valley, the corridor for the Hartford Line project, as we're calling it now. Some of us have transportation as an avocation, some of us have it as a job, but for most folks, transportation is a tool that helps us live our lives. And regardless of mode, we use transportation to go from home to school, to work, to shop, to recreate. The focus here is jobs, but the features that make transportation system work well for all of these purposes, and as well as for development, also serve the purpose of jobs. We think that, as I said, our projects are going to be game changers and life changers when we start operating them. I'd like to share just a little bit of my own experience because public transportation was a game changer in my life. I grew up in the Berkshires in western Massachusetts in a small city that had zero public transportation. When I went down to Boston to go to school, I didn't think I could afford the dorms, so I freeloaded with one of my mother's relatives and commuted from Medford, which is on one side of Boston, across the city to Boston College in Newton. And I spent 4 excruciating hours a day going to and from school because those were the darkest days of the MBTA's service quality. Nonetheless, it did not diminish my enthusiasm for what the public transportation could do for me in the rest of my life. I could get to my so-so job at Bradley's by bus. I could get to my better job at the Children's Museum by subway and trolley. I could get to Boston Garden to see the Celtics and Elvis Presley. I could make regular trips to Filing's basement. My world completely opened up from being a small-town girl from the Berkshires to someone who could enjoy the panoply of life in a nice city. It's not a big city, Mike. It's a nice city. It's a little city compared to New York. So I've had that experience of having public transportation transform my life, and it was so impressive on me that obviously I've made it my living since that time. But I think that's what we're headed for with CT Fast Track and with the Hartford Line service. I don't know what else I can add to what you all know about it, but let's just answer the question. CT Fast Track, why BRT? Well, it makes a fabulous runway. We're connected to the FAA. So the other answer is it provides all the benefits of rapid transit with the flexibility of a bus system. What does it mean for employment? It means that we provide opportunities, connectivity, mobility, all those transit buzzwords for folks that want to get to all the things they want to do in their lives, but foremost, as we're saying here, for jobs. So you take the features of bus rapid transit that make it a high-quality service, and we want to make it something that people want and need to use to get to jobs, to get to recreation, to get to school. And the Fast Track Guideway is liberally salted with all of those things. So we think that we have a dedicated guideway that provides a speedy, reliable trip. We have stations with platforms that allow level boarding for folks with mobility devices, bicycles and such. There's no more putting the bike on the front of the bus. You take it right onto the bus. Our vehicles are distinctive. They're comfortable, they have capacity, and they come frequently enough that you know you're going to get a ride. We used to joke about commuter rail needing a calendar in order to know when you take your trip. You won't need a timetable or a schedule for the fast track. You just walk onto the platform and you can expect a bus any minute. Our fare collection system will be state-of-the-art. Eventually will be state-of-the-art. We'll start out with using the mag stripe ticket we have today, which I use on my 47 bus. Eventually we'll have the smart card like this one from Montreal. We'll have the ability to pay using a smartphone, and it will have all the things that help you pay for the trip before you get on the bus, which speeds travel, speeds the trip, gets you where you're going as quickly as possible. The buses will be equipped with Wi-Fi, so you can enjoy your trip, relax, and connect to the internet and read what you need to read, do some work on the way if you're so inclined. The stations are connected to the neighborhoods by circulators. We have circulators that will connect you to jobs at the medical center. The CCSU bus will connect you to the university. You can go to West Farms Mall directly from the Guideway. Express buses will come from the southwestern part of the state, from Bristol and Waterbury, Cheshire and Southington. Get onto the Guideway and enjoy the last 10 miles of the trip without congestion, without delay. It will bring you to the front door of your employer on the other end and circulate through the city of Hartford. All of these features of bus rapid transit we think will provide people what they need in order to take this service, understand it, rely on it, and make it their way of getting to work. Some days I like to call it the Stop and Shop line. There are jobs there too. There's, I think, 3 Stop and Shops on the Fast Track, but that's an opportunity for other jobs. Transit-oriented development is one of the buzzwords we're using today as well. It's already starting on the Fast Track. The government has some involvement. The state is subsidizing the cleanup of a site in Newington adjacent to our Cedar Street station. But folks look and notice what we're doing, the investment we're making, and residential and commercial development is growing up along the Guideway because they know the people will be there. We're building it, and they're going to come. I think that the contribution to jobs, to the community, I think, is taking a while to convince this public at large about, but I think we're getting there. As has been mentioned, our opening day is March 28th. We'll be starting service then, hopefully with a grand opening, but we haven't decided what that looks like yet. And we will be starting the service toward the end of the winter, so don't worry about the snow right away, but we've got that under control. Right now, the construction is coming to a completion. We're finishing up the commissioning activities, installing the systems that will give us the high-tech signage and information that also makes it like rapid transit. You'll be able to get when is the next bus coming, how many minutes do I have to wait, any information about the service we might need to give you, other information about the area that we need to give will be on graphics in the station. We're going to inundate you with information and news you can use. We think that the system will come online. Eventually we'll get some of the, as I said, some of the higher tech stuff, the smart cards, the telephone apps. Again, you can use your cell phone to see where your bus is. If someone wants to see the system from Seattle or Boston, I'd be happy to show it to you. You look up online, when is my bus coming? You know how much time you have for a cup of coffee or to take your time walking and enjoy the sights. I'd like to move on to the New Haven, Hartford, Springfield line project, which we're starting to roll out our brand. We're calling it the Hartford line. It's a line that's owned by Amtrak that we're using high-speed and ARA money from the federal government along with a significant state contribution to make into a high-speed rail line. This is what you might call incremental high speed. It's going to be 90 miles an hour. But we're going to take the service from 10 round trips a day up to 17 round trips a day. We'll have significant service in the rush hour every half hour or so that you could actually rely on it to get to an employment center or a school somewhere on the line between New Haven and Springfield. We're building 5 new stations that will allow for comfortable wait. It's not exactly like Fast Track. You will need a schedule, but we're hoping to build a system in such a manner that it's highly reliable and you'll be able to rely on it for school, work, and any of the other activities that you might want to enjoy anywhere along the line. This system is starting construction now. We've been in design for about a year and a half. The opening day is scheduled for late 2016, probably somewhere around December. We're hoping to make it another game changer for the citizens of Connecticut. It is rail transit. It's not rapid transit. It's not the New Haven line, but we think it's going to provide to fill a gap in the transportation system that people will rely on. There are huge, we're not pushing people going up to the casino in Springfield. They can come down here and go to the Wadsworth. But we think there's significant resources all along the line, and we're now providing new connectivity for this corridor as well. We think that eventually we're aiming towards something like 36 round trips a day in the next 20 years. And again, money is the issue. Time and development also are required. But we think that this will be, again, the beginning of a new day for Connecticut public transportation. The TOD is also happening on the New Haven, Hartford, Springfield line. The Meriden is very much involved in development adjacent to the line. The state is supporting that. We are supporting it. And all along the line, we're starting to see interest in development, commercial activity, residential, where people know that we're making this investment. Both projects add up to almost $1 billion invested by the state of Connecticut as well as our federal partners. And we hope that in the long run it brings that payoff for jobs, because that's jobs building it and jobs that people then can get to once the projects are finished. DOT also has a role in job access. For almost 20 years, we've participated with federal funds to provide extensions and additions to local service to help people get to jobs such as those at Bradley Airport. We continue to participate in that and try to support its continued existence, which sometimes is questioned. But I think that's one feature you didn't ask me to talk about, but I thought I'd throw in there, that we do pay attention to jobs in several ways. So I know we're hoping for an interactive session, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. While Mary is collecting some questions for the panel, I think I'd just like to open up with maybe a very general question. It seems like after hearing Ann's comments, there are some opportunities and some potential for employers to encourage the use of public transportation. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts or ideas of how to create partnerships with the community or businesses to sort of encourage this or create this dialogue and move things forward. I think there is something going on at the busway, but if there are any opportunities out there.
I know I talk to other employers as often as I can. We benchmark with other major employers in downtown Hartford just to kind of compare what we're all doing as far as parking and mass transit. And we do share ideas back and forth. We do encourage them to take part in the same sorts of programs that we have at Travelers. And I think keeping the lines of communication open and speaking to other companies as often as possible, I think is something that we do.
And the DOT obviously has a program I think you all are familiar with called CT Rides, and it's our Transportation Demand Program. We work with employers and to try to develop programs that fit their needs and provide alternatives. It encourages van pooling as well as development of other connections, and provides information about how to use the systems, how to get the fare program started. And we rely on that for a lot of outreach to the commercial and job-creating community around the state of Connecticut. Charity begins at home, too, I guess, so we're now working with the Division of Administrative Services to try to find ways to encourage state employees to use the system. So I think we're working on our own version of outreach and looking at some of the very same things that Ann has mentioned to try to get state employees to be aware of and to use the public transportation alternatives that are that are available to them. So.
Thank you. I do have a question from the audience. What are the panelists' ideas or plans for the future to expand accessible transportation for seniors and people with disabilities to get to work, both inter-regional and intra-region travel? Is there anything specifically for people with disabilities that you would think about?
Well, the department subsidizes the purchase of hundreds of vans, and it's a major part of what we do in the state, but primarily they're administered and operated by local and regional entities. I'm not aware of specific efforts at this time to connect regions for accessible service, but that is an issue because generally the van service ends at the border. My own sister takes advantage of one of those in the Boston area, and getting that last mile, as we say, is sometimes a challenge. So I'm not aware of any. Some of you in the audience maybe, or others here? No.
Another question from the audience is, what will it take for Connecticut to adopt express mode share goals? If we had them, we could integrate them with our economic development agenda and business site selection. We could incentivize the private sector to encourage more actively alternatives to driving. I had a question along those same lines. I was just wondering, it seems like, Bill talks a little bit about jobs moving farther away from the city, but Ann, you have a different perspective. You have people coming from the suburbs into a more densely populated area. But I was wondering if you had any thoughts along those lines.
I don't think I've heard this question before, but I think it's a good one. And I think maybe by chance the DOT is engaged in an effort that may actually, progress that. As many of you may have heard, we're engaged in a strategic planning effort called Transform CT, in which we're trying to develop from the state, from the citizens of the state, Connecticut's vision for its transportation system over the next 50 years. And I'm not sure that we've stated a goal of coming down with, express goals for mode share, but I think it equates to that. I think we're looking at what we need to build in order for the state to survive and thrive. And I think I'll talk to Tom Maziarz when I get back to see what he thinks about actually some explicit goals in that direction.
I just want to comment. We've had really mixed success in working with companies in terms of trying to have some collective ride share. One example I could give, I don't want to mention the companies. There were two companies that were in Orange, Connecticut, almost sitting right on the highway, and a third company that had won the contract to provide the employment in the service stations on the highway, the rest stops. And we were trying to put together a deal where all three of those companies would somehow collectively share the cost of getting people to work, because on individuals that worked on the highway on the highway rest stops could get close and then had to walk about a half a mile, and the last piece of it was going through somebody's backyard under a fence to get to work. I mean, it was really a very difficult, and that project unfortunately fell apart because the companies just didn't seem to be willing to put their share of the investment in the project. And there's people in this room that sat on our transportation group that can do this. And then there was another, on the other hand, you get much more progressive companies, certainly like Travelers. There was an article recently in New Haven Independent about a company in South Windsor, Ticket Network, I will tell them because they're a good company, who is providing free transportation from people from New Haven to South Windsor. And a quote from the VP of Human Resources said that they concluded that a free ride to work could be a decent recruiting tool for attracting bright students from New Haven area colleges and universities for internships and entry-level jobs with the company. So, you know, we've had varying levels of success, and I can't say everybody is equally on the same page with this issue.
I guess my next question has to deal with the evolution of the current transit systems in Connecticut. I think someone told me at some point many of today's transit systems are based on former streetcar lines from 1907, and I don't know how accurate that was, but it sounds like maybe that might be a real evolution of what we're dealing with today. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts or ideas on how we would just re-engineer some of what we have today to make it faster for people to get the jobs, or are there any partnerships that could help with re-engineering some of what, if it has evolved this way, how could we re-engineer it a little bit to make it a little better?
Well, Mike Sanders and Dave Lee have more history than I have here, but I don't think they go back to 1907. But close. But my experience in public transportation, I was at the Transit Authority in Boston for almost 25 years, was that the systems do evolve, but sometimes they need a little bit of a jolt to evolve further. So it's not as if they stand still. They probably did start out as the streetcar routes, but eventually we tweak them. We continuously tweak them as needs arise. But we also try to keep an eye on where new employers are located. If we have a chance to talk to them before they relocate, we try to encourage them to stay on an existing route. But I think it's a continuous process. There's an active interaction with the Council of Governments. We're listening to what people have to say. But you generally don't engineer major changes in a transit bus network, because you have people that have actually grown up to rely on where it is. And sometimes they move away, and you have to be aware of that. But for us in the public transportation business, it's more of a continuous awareness of what's changing, new employers, schools, new connections, where are the jitneys coming from in the vans, what can we do to accommodate them. And I think we do a good job of keeping our ears open to that. Some may do it better than others, but maybe it's more dialogue, more interaction. But it's a way you live in public transportation when you run a bus system and you're good at it.
I just want to throw out there that something that a number of the major employers in downtown Hartford had talked about a few years ago, what started out as the downtown circulator and then evolved into the Star Shuttle and is now the Dash. We found that our employees have kind of tailored that transportation from the convention center to travelers, because they find that walking across the street to the convention center might be a little further than they want to walk. And especially on a bad day, they can just hop on at the convention center after parking there, jump on the Dash, and get dropped off right in front of travelers. But I noticed that they're also using it to circulate around downtown, to go down to Union Place or whatever. But that's something that just kind of evolved and was the result of a number of the employers in downtown talking about how do we put this downtown circulator together. So.
I'd like to thank you all for agreeing to come in this morning and participating. I think it's been a very nice discussion, and I think it kind of goes hand in hand with our keynote speaker today. So, Karen, at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. The next panel is going to be moderated by Lyle Ray, and I'm going to give you all the opportunity to stand. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for the thank you, Lyle. Thank you all very much. I'm going to give you all the opportunity to stand up and shift your seats over to the center, because the topic of this panel is attracting new riders using technology to get around, and we're going to be using technology this morning. We're going to have a guest speaker Skyped in from Houston. So for you to see him well, this is your chance to stand. This is a 7th inning stretch. Stand up and move your seats over more to the center.
Let me stand up for 1 second here while our panel gets organized. We have a guest speaker coming to us from Houston. Just while we're getting our Skype connection, I wanted to give our panelists an opportunity just to do a 30-second introduction of themselves, and then we'll introduce the main speaker. What we're talking